That was me. Right-hand seat. First officer. My one job that day was to watch the approach and say something if it wasn't right. It wasn't right. I could see it wasn't right, and I said nothing. We landed. Firm, but we landed. Nothing broke. We taxied in, and that was that. I've thought about that approach for years. Not because it was dangerous, it wasn't particularly, because of the one question it leaves behind. I knew, so why didn't I say anything? That is the whole video. Why the call doesn't come, and what it actually takes to make it. Let me take you back to it properly, because the detail is rather the point. Aberdeen, a perfect day. The kind of clear, still afternoon where nothing is asking anything of you. No weather, no turbulence, no pressure from outside the flight deck. We'd asked for a visual approach, so the profile was ours to fly. We owned it completely. The training captain was flying. I was monitoring. He briefed it the way you'd want. Pointed off the nose at the town sitting ahead of us and said, in effect, I'll turn base just after the town. Configure during the turn, lined up, stabilized by our agreed gate. Specific reference, agreed out loud, a plan. And then he turned early. Not massively, the town was still ahead of us when the aircraft started to come around. Earlier than he'd said, just a few minutes after he'd said it. I noticed. I want to be clear about that. I didn't miss it. I saw the turn come early, and I said nothing. Because it was small, and because saying something felt like making a fuss about nothing. Turning early made the base leg tighter and higher, more energy than the profile needed. Energy has to go somewhere, so now we're high and we're fast, and the descent rates steepened to fix the height, which just trades one problem for another. We reached the gate, the point where you're meant to be stable or going around, and we weren't stable. I said something. I want to be honest about that too. I said, Steve, we're a bit high. He gave a small nod and kept flying. And the approach carried on because what I'd said wasn't a call. It was a remark that could just as well have been about the weather. By the threshold, it had just about come back. Technically stable, but high energy. Both of us completely absorbed in the approach rather than the landing. Firm touchdown. Right place, nothing broke, and we taxied in. And I felt nothing, really. Relief, maybe. It worked. Afterwards, during the inevitable meeting with the chief pilot, he didn't ask what was wrong with me. He didn't ask why I hadn't made the call. He asked a completely different question. How have we allowed this to happen to you? A systemic question, and the right one, I think. It took me years to understand why. Because here's where I've ended up. These days, I occasionally get to sit in the jump seat behind two pilots and assess them. I'm a type rating examiner. I examine pilots for a living. I hold them against a competency standard and grade the gap between the standard and what's actually in front of me. If I'd been in the jump seat watching the approach I flew that day in Aberdeen, I'd have failed both pilots, including the version of me in the right-hand seat. I assess people against a standard I didn't meet. It's not a comfortable thing to say on camera, but it's the honest starting point for everything that follows. Because if it can happen to someone who now grades it for a living, the interesting question isn't who's to blame, it's why. For a long time, I assumed Aberdeen was a me problem. A bad day, a junior first officer, a lesson learned. It isn't a me problem, it's an industry problem, and the numbers are honestly hard to look at. A few years ago, the Flight Safety Foundation decided the industry had something it couldn't explain. Crews were flying approaches that didn't meet the criteria, and then landing off them anyway. And nobody could account for why. So they did the rare thing. They funded a dedicated, multi-year study of one single decision, the go-around. Industry-wide, academically run, over 2,000 pilots surveyed. Here's what they found. Around 65% of all commercial aviation accidents happen in approach and landing. The last few minutes of the flight, the part we practice most and, it would seem, respect least. The single biggest risk factor in those accidents is the failure to go around. Not a contributing factor, the leading one. And the really shocking one, 95 to 97% of unstable approaches continue to a landing. 97. Every operations manual in the industry says an unstable approach requires a go-around. Almost none of them get one. So it's not that pilots don't know the rule. Every pilot knows the rule. The rule is just perhaps not being followed. Across the whole industry, thousands of flights, hundreds of airlines, which means Aberdeen wasn't my failure of knowledge. It was an example of something much bigger and much more interesting. So why? If everyone knows the rule, why does the call so rarely come? In my opinion, there are 4 reasons. You might be able to recognize them in your own flying. 1. The plan runs by default. NASA researchers went back through dozens of accidents and found the same pattern in nearly 3/4 of them. The crew just continued with the original plan, despite cues telling them not to. They called it plan continuation bias. Here's the thing about it, the go-around isn't rejected. It's never decided at all. A plan that's already running doesn't need a decision to keep running. It continues on its own. The go-around is the bit you have to actively choose against all that momentum. At Aberdeen, neither of us decided to continue an unstable approach. We just never decided to stop. And not deciding to stop feels like nothing. That's exactly why it's so hard to catch. 2. The words get softer the more junior you are. 2 NASA researchers, Fisher and Orasanu, asked 150-odd pilots a simple question. When something's going wrong, what exact words would you use? What came back was a ladder, from a direct command at the top down to a vague hint at the bottom. Captains reached for commands. First officers reached for hints. The more junior you are, the softer the words get, at exactly the moment they need to be the hardest. And at the soft end of that ladder is where I was at Aberdeen. We're a bit high, bottom rung. A hint, and hints statistically don't work. Not because the person's a coward, but because a hint names a problem without naming an action. So the other pilot can agree with it and just keep flying. This is not a small effect. In 1982, an Air Florida 737 took off from a snow-covered runway in Washington with iced-up engine sensors. First officer saw something was wrong with the readings. Listen to how he raised it. That don't seem right, does it? That's not right. Hints. Captain pressed on. The aircraft barely got airborne and went into the Potomac. The first officer saw it. He just never said the sentence that would have stopped it. 3. A go-around feels like failure. This one isn't in many manuals, but it's underneath everything. Pilots are paid to land planes. That's the job. So a go-around that nobody asked you for, one you called because your own approach wasn't good enough, is a public admission that you didn't meet the standard. Even though it's the correct call, even though it's exactly what a go-around is for, I'm not going to pretend that feeling isn't real. Dismissing it doesn't help anyone. The go-around is the right professional response to a bad approach. It's the system working, not failing. But it still feels like an admission, and pretending otherwise is how we keep landing off approaches we shouldn't. 4. And this is the one you can actually use tomorrow. The 3-part call. The fix isn't assertiveness training. It isn't confidence. It's a sentence structure. 3 parts. State the problem, give the reason, name the action. Same second, same picture, different sentence, and the aircraft goes around. The speed and the rate of descent are both high. The problem, we are not stable. The reason, go around. The action, no hostility, no drama, a complete sentence that leaves nothing to be guessed at. That's the difference between we're a bit high and a call that actually changes what the aircraft does. And the trick is that the sentence has to be ready before you read it, not assembled under pressure on short final when your brain has the least room to build it. Back to Aberdeen, not as a neat conclusion, but as the real point. I knew that day. I knew the standard. I'd been trained to it. I could see the approach wasn't meeting it in the moment in real time. And I knew again with total clarity in hindsight. And that, it turns out, is the most common thing in the whole study. The Flight Safety Foundation surveyed thousands of pilots who'd recently continued an unstable approach. In hindsight, in large numbers, they agreed. Wrong call, needless risk, shouldn't have done it. They knew, and they continued. Just like me. So here's what I keep coming back to. The call is available. It was available to me in Aberdeen. There was a clear second where the words would have fit. It was available to the first officer over the Potomac. It's available on almost every approach that ends up in one of these reports. The go-around has almost always been there for the taking, so the real question, the one I'd actually like you to sit with, what is stopping it? And I mean you specifically. If you fly, when did you last fly a go-around for real? And when you picture calling for one on an approach that isn't quite right, what is it exactly that would make you hesitate? I'd genuinely like to know. Put it in the comments. I read them, and the honest ones are where this conversation actually gets useful. This is the kind of thing this channel is here for. The decisions, the culture, the psychology of how good professionals end up making bad calls, and what it takes to make the right one when it counts. If that's your world, there's more of it to come. And if you train pilots, if you run a flight training organization or a CRM program, there is a full training module built around this, with the scenario, the facilitation, and the competency framework. Details for that will be in the description, but that's for the training room. This was for you. How have we allowed this to happen to you? That's still the right question. I don't think we finished answering it.